For round 1 of our muzzle for Doug for Dog, we are going to start with a slip knot on our hook. We are then going to chain 6. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're going to make an increase in the second chain from the hook. That's 2 single crochets in the same spot. We're going to follow that with 3 single crochets in the next 3 chains. That's 1, and 2, and 3. In the last chain we're going to make a 4 single crochet increase, meaning we're going to put 4 single crochets in the same spot. That's number 2, number 3, and number 4. By the time you've made number 4, you'll notice that your chain's turned around. We're now working down the back of the chain. So we're going to make 3 single crochets. That is 1, 2, and 3. And then in our final stitch, which is also the very first chain we worked in, we're going to make an increase. That's 1 and 2. And that brings us to the end of round 1 of the muzzle. For round 2, we're going to start with 2 increases. So the first stitch gets an increase, and the second stitch also gets an increase. The next 3 stitches gets a single crochet each. So that's 1, 2, and 3. The next 4 stitches will each get an increase. That is 1, 2, increase number 3, and increase number 4. The next 3 stitches will each get 1 single crochet. So that's 1, 2, and 3. The last 2 stitches will each get an increase. That's increase 1 and increase 2, which brings us to the end of round 2. For round 3, we'll be making 22 single crochets, that is 1 in each of our stitches. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, which brings us to the end of round 3. For round 4 and round 5, we're going to do exactly the same thing, making 22 stitches all the way around. So we're going to show you that section in fast forward. Round 6 is a very short round. We're only going to make one single crochet to get our positioning in the correct place, and then we are going to finish off with a slip stitch. Now we need to leave a long end because we are going to be using this tail to sew the muzzle to the head. So leave yourself enough yarn to sew all the way around. Rather have a bit extra than not enough. One little trick that I do is, you'll see our slip stitch has gone into this stitch here. So what I do to make for neat sewing is I take my hook through the next stitch from the inside out. I hook that yarn tail and I just pull it in to the inside of the muzzle all the way through. You can do this with ears, muzzles, feet, legs, arms, anything that you are crocheting that you're going to be sewing on. And in doing it that way, you just create a neater finish at the end, and when you sew you won't get that step in the way. So that is the muzzle for Doug the dog. Next we're going to be stuffing the muzzle and pinning it into place on the face for Doug the dog. So first we start by taking some stuffing and putting it inside the muzzle. Use your thumbs to push it in. You don't want to stuff it very firmly at this point. You just want to get enough in to sort of keep the shape of the muzzle. You can always add a bit more later. So I put it in like that and I hold it down with my thumb, at which point I flip it over and press against the head. Now what we want to do when we are pinning it into place is, firstly we want the muzzle to line up just below the eyes, and we also want to make sure that it's even so it doesn't stick past on this side or on that side. You want to get it an even result. Once you're happy with your placement, you just take a pin and you start pinning your muzzle into place. Now, once you are done pinning the muzzle, it's very important to double check your position. You don't want to sew it if it's not in the correct spot. So I like to check from the top like this, so that I can see if it's sticking past more on one side than the other. I like to check from the front, I check from the bottom, and I also check from both sides to make sure that I've gotten my angles correct. Once you are happy with the positioning of your muzzle, you can start sewing it into place. Okay, as always when we are sewing, we're going to be making use of invisible stitches, which means that whenever we stick the needle through the head, as I am doing, we are working under the muzzle rather than next to the muzzle. By working under the piece you're sewing on, you are hiding your yarn and you are creating nice neat little stitches that won't be easily visible to the eye afterwards. So every single time that I go through the head stitches, it is under the muzzle. As you can see there. Every time I pull tight, the stitch basically disappears. Now, at the top here, I am working my stitches so that my muzzle lines up with this row of stitches that we've got between the eyes to create a nice straight top for the muzzle. So this row here is what I'm sewing along. And just slowly stitch by stitch. Again, like with stuffing, sewing is a very important part of the process, and by doing it neatly you create a beautiful product that people are willing to pay for, If you rush through it, it will look like you rushed through it and your product won't have that neat finish that everybody hopes to achieve. When you get to the eyes, it can be a little bit more difficult to stick the needle through because the backs of your safety eyes could be getting in the way. Just keep wiggling at it. Use a pair of pliers if it gets too tough to move. I've got a little pair like this, which I just use to grip my needle and pull it through whenever it gets stuck a little bit. There we go. And we're just going to keep working nice and neatly all the way around the muzzle like this, going through the muzzle stitches and then through the head stitches, but making sure that we stay underneath the muzzle's position each time. You can see, even though I am now sewing with taupe yarn and I'm sewing it onto an ivory section, by keeping my stitches under the muzzle, when I pull tight, the stitches completely disappear and you can't actually see them. And this is basically what they refer to as invisible stitches. You can use this technique for anything that you are sewing on in amigurumi and it'll give you a very nice neat result. Of course, the smaller your stitches are and the closer together you make them, the neater your end result will be. And we're just going to keep going round and round. Let's push that stuffing away. When you get to the bottom part, you also want to make sure that you sew in as much of a straight line as you can to keep your muzzle nice and balanced. Now, we're not going to sew it all the way closed because we didn't really put much stuffing in there to begin with. We just wanted to get the basic shape as we were sewing so that we could have the right size. So while we're sewing, we're just going to stop a little bit short of our starting point, leaving a gap in the muzzle through which we can insert more stuffing. I'm going to do one more stitch. There we go. And that's leaving us with our opening over there that our flat needle can fit through. Just take a bit of stuffing and push it in. You want to stuff your muzzle relatively firmly, but not as firm as you did the head and the body, because we will be doing a little bit of needle sculpting and we want to have some give in the muzzle. When you do stuff it this way, make sure that you push the stuffing all the way through to the other side so that you don't just stuff the side where the hole is, but the entire muzzle nice and even. Like you can see there, that is more than enough. Once you're happy with the amount of stuffing in there, you can just close up that last section. Now, if you've used bigger stitches to sew, you're going to have to go around a second time in order to get a nice even result and to make sure that your muzzle doesn't come loose at an unfortunate moment. I've sewn quite closely together, so I don't need to go all the way around. It really is up to you. Check how well you've sewn it on before you decide how far you want to go. So for me, I reckon that's sufficient. So I'm just going to go in through the muzzle and come out at a random head stitch through. Now what we want to do is we want to work this end to the same hole that this end is coming out from. So we go in the same hole we just came out at and push it through to a body stitch rather than a head stitch. Pull through, and again in by the same hole we just came out of, and this time our needle's going to come out in the hole that's our target where the other short end is. At this point we're simply going to knot these two ends together. You have to make sure that they're coming out of the same hole, otherwise this is not going to work for you. That's tight. Snip it off short. And you're just going to push this knot into the body through that hole. It can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but just keep pressing on it. Try different angles if you need to. And as you press, you'll see that the whole knot disappears into the body and you can't see where it was at all. It's now hidden on the inside, and because we've tied the end of the body to the end of the muzzle, these two pieces now won't come loose because they're tied together on the inside. And that is how you attach the muzzle to the body. This is what your result should look like at this point. Next up will be needle sculpting and embroidering the face.